Now, the book of Sirach, or also known as the wisdom of Sirach, or the wisdom of Ben Sirach, or also known as Ecclesiasticus, is a magnificent early Old Testament book. Now, the majority of scholars today, and very clearly as we've noted multiple times, note it was very clearly originally written in Hebrew. Now, likely probably written around 190, or even some scholars say around 170 BCE. You have here a fantastic early book. Now, who would have translated this into Greek? We know that would have been Ben Sirach's grandson. This was done very early on. Now, this book has always been considered to be part of the Christian Old Testament. And when I say always, I mean always. As we pointed out many times, there is not a single council of the church when the church gathered, whether it have been locally, whether it would have been an ecumenical council, every time the early Christians gathered to discuss the contents of sacred scripture, the book of Sirach was always included in the list of Old Testament books. There is not an exception, not a one. You're never going to encounter a council, whether it be Council of Rome 382, Hippo of Carthage 393 or 397, you're never going to encounter a council that is lacking the book of Sirach. Indeed, even quoted from at multiple ecumenical councils, and indeed utilized by church fathers all throughout history, and even quoted from in the New Testament. But the utilization of the book of Sirach is not what we're going to dialogue or discuss today. Rather, we're going to look at the fact that the book of Sirach also, like other Old Testament books, contains intercession of the saints taught within it. Did you ever know that? Did you know that the early church fathers recognized that? Did you know? Oh, well, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we're going to break down the texts that clearly show that. And maybe you'll be able to see the book of Sirach come to life before your very eyes in a way that it maybe never has come to life before your eyes before in this respect. And indeed, the book of Sirach is a masterfully rich book. Now, we begin in Sirach 48, 1-4. Where we read in the Revised Standard Version, Catholic edition, then the prophet Elijah arose like a fire, and his word burned like a torch. He brought a famine upon them, and by his zeal he made them few in number. By the word of the Lord he shut up the heavens, and also 3 times brought down fire. How glorious you were, Elijah, in your wondrous deeds. And who has the right to boast which you have? Interestingly enough, over and over, the author is communicating with Elijah, speaking to Elijah, reaching out to Elijah, if you will. And, just read it again to realize what we're talking about. And the prophet Elijah arose like a fire. So he's sharing certain details about the prophet Elijah's life. He arose like a fire, and his word burned like a torch. He brought a famine upon them, and by his zeal he made them few in number. By the word of the Lord he shut up the heavens, and also 3 times brought down fire. But then right there, the author will then begin to call out to Elijah. How glorious you were, Elijah, in your wondrous deeds. And who has the right to boast which you have? Now that's inescapable, very clearly. The author calling out to Elijah. Now, that is something that we think to be a little bit of an interesting tidbit. But then we're totally blown away how in Ecclesiasticus 48, 9-10, we read, you who were taken up by a whirlwind of fire in a chariot with horses of fire, you who are ready at the appointed time, it is written to calm the wrath of God before it breaks out in fury, to turn the heart of the father to the son, and to restore the tribes of Jacob. Now, it really does seem to us here that Elijah, heavenly Elijah, is being spoken of as an intercessor. Heavenly Elijah is being laid out as one that can intercede. In these verses, Elijah is depicted as a powerful intercessor who can turn away God's wrath and restore the people. This portrayal suggests that Elijah's role goes beyond his earthly life and implies a continuing influence, which is a key aspect of the intercession of the saints. Now, before we go on to early Jewish history, before we go on to looking and see what the early church had to say, it is important to look at the text again. Notice how early on in the previous verses, you hear great things about Elijah recounted to us. And then even calling out to Elijah, how glorious you were, Elijah, in your wondrous deeds. And who has the right to boast which you have? But then you arrive at the noting of the author that Elijah can intercede. Elijah's role is as that of an intercessor. And of that, there can be no doubt. That's clearly laid out here. But if that was the case, that Elijah was viewed as an intercessor early on, well, then you'd expect us to have some sort of evidence, right? Now, we promised the early church father evidence. But how about we dig into the Targums first? Because one can easily come back and say, okay, Catholic, or okay, Orthodox, whatever. This is an apocryphal book. The Jews they clearly did not view Elijah as an intercessor, even though the book of Sirach is a Jewish work. They'll say, well, that's a later form of Judaism. There's no evidence that outside of that, they viewed him as an intercessor, as a heavenly intercessor. And we can prove them wrong, and we're going to do that. Because there are Targums that identify Elijah as a powerful intercessor in the afterlife. Specifically, Targum Jonathan on 1 Kings 17:22, and Targum Pseudo-Jonathan on Exodus 6:18. They mention Elijah in the context of intercessory roles. That is significant. That's very, very significant. Now, what are Targums? Now, in Targum Jonathan on 1 Kings 17:22, Elijah is depicted as a figure with significant spiritual authority, whose prayers are answered by God to revive the widow's son. This portrayal aligns with the broader Jewish tradition of recognizing Elijah as an intercessor who's active in the heavenly realms. But what are the Targums? What are they? The Targums are written in Aramaic, the lingua franca of Jews after the Babylonian exile. As Hebrew became less commonly spoken, the need for translations in the synagogue arose, leading to the creation of the Targums. Now, it would also be important to point out that the development of the Targums likely began around the 5th century BCE, with many of the texts reaching their final form by the 1st century Christian era. What was their purpose? Translation and explanation. The Targums are not just word-for-word translations, but they also include interpretative expansions, explanations, and paraphrasing. This makes them valuable for understanding how ancient Jewish communities understood difficult passages. Now, isn't that something? That's part of the reason why we utilize them, why they're important. Liturgical use. They're often read alongside the Hebrew text during synagogue services to make the scriptures accessible to those who no longer understood Hebrew. Types of Targums. Targum onkelos, the most widely accepted and used Targum, primarily for the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. It is a more literal translation with fewer expansions. So these now we're looking at what types of Targums we have. This is so important because we're going to show you how mind-blowing and important that text is in the book of Sirach, and how you can utilize it when evangelizing and showing that it is biblical to speak about the intercession of the saints, heavenly Elijah's intercession. Now, we're talking about the Targums. Targum Jonathan. This covers the prophets. Now, this covering the prophets and includes more interpretive and paraphrastic elements. Other Targums, there are Targums for the writings, the Ketuvim, and other parts of the Hebrew Bible, which vary in their level of interpretive content. What is the importance of the Targums in interpreting the Old Testament? Remember, the Targums provide for us insight into the beliefs, the practices, and the theological developments of Jewish communities during the Second Temple period. They reflect how Jews of that time understood and applied their scriptures. Interpretative insights. The paraphrastic nature of the Targums often includes interpretations and expansions that reveal the theological concerns and messianic expectations of the period. This can help modern readers understand how certain passages were understood where in ancient Judaism. So it brings ancient Judaism to life. It literally brings it to life. It brings teachings to light and allows us to understand how the early Jewish community understood particular passages. The way you like looking at the early fathers and how they interpreted the biblical text, well, the Targums help us understand certain interpretations. Does it mean that we agree with them, that they're dogmatic, that they're on the level of Holy Writ? Not at all. But it'll help us to understand the historical interpretations and the historical beliefs of the region at the time. Now, if we can show that there are Old Testament books that talk about the intercession of the saints, and then this is carried on even in the Targums, and then in early Christianity in an unbroken lineage, well, then it is not a novelty. Now, that's how you do theology with the Targums. You show that it's not a novelty. And that's what we are doing today with the theology that you find in the book of Sirach, with a heavenly Elijah being presented to us. The language and the textual comparison. Comparing the Aramaic of the Targums with the original Hebrew text can, and it does, shed light on how certain words and phrases were interpreted, giving clues about difficult or ambiguous passages. And it brings us back to what we read just a moment ago. In Targum Jonathan, on 1 Kings 17:22, Elijah is depicted as a figure with significant spiritual authority, whose prayers are answered by God to revive the widow's son. This portrayal aligns with the broader Jewish tradition of recognizing Elijah as an intercessor who is active in heavenly realms. There is more. There is more. Spoiler alert. Additionally, Targum Pseudo-Jonathan on Exodus 6:18 elaborates on Elijah's enduring presence and his future role in eschatological events. This text hints at Elijah's continued intercessory function, suggesting that his influence extends beyond his earthly life. Now, if the Targums are showing this, and if the Deuterocanonical books are showing this, yes, you can be sure this is something the early Jews believed, and by extension, the early Christians. These references in the Targums highlight Elijah's esteemed position as an intercessor, both in life and in the afterlife, reflecting the broader Jewish tradition that venerates him as a powerful prophet and spiritual mediator. I know you're probably thinking, how about we read the Targums? We're getting there. Targum Jonathan on 1 Kings 17:22. This passage describes Elijah's prayer to God to revive the widow's son. The translation reads, "And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child returned to him, and he lived." The Lord listened to the voice of Elijah. The soul of the child returned to him, and he lived. Now, this is definitely intercession. This is amazing. This is incredible and fits in right with the very context and the beating heart of the message presented to us in the book of Sirach that we just looked at, the text that we looked at a few moments ago. While the Targum, Jonathan, closely follows a Masoretic text, in this instance, Jewish tradition often elaborates on the role of Elijah as an intercessor. Catch that? Jewish tradition does this. So we are in good company if we say this is biblical. It's in an Old Testament Jewish book. And if our interlocutors say that's not Jewish, really, you can show them the Targums. They emphasize his powerful prayers and the miracles associated with them. Targum pseudo Jonathan on Exodus 6:18. This Targum often contains expanded interpretations and additions to the biblical text. The translation reads, "And the years of the life of Kohath were 133 years, and he saw the children of his children, even Elijah the high priest, who is to be sent at the end of days." This Targum adds an eschatological dimension to Elijah, identifying him as a significant figure in future events. It implies that Elijah, he has an ongoing role that transcends his earthly life, which can be interpreted as an intercessory role in the afterlife. These Targumic references, they help underline the Jewish tradition of recognizing Elijah as a powerful figure in both the present and eschatological future, emphasizing his continued spiritual influence and intercessory capabilities. All right, now that we have looked and examined all of that, we are now going to return to Sirach, and we're going to do an exegetical breakdown because we think that it will incredibly edify you. Let's go over it now. Again, that the prophet Elijah rose like a fire, and his work burned like a torch. He brought a famine upon them, and by his zeal he made them few in number. By the word of the Lord he shut up the heavens, and also 3 times he brought down fire. How glorious you were, Elijah, in your wondrous deeds, and who has the right to boast which you have? You who were taken up by a whirlwind of fire, in a chariot with horses of fire. You are ready at the appointed time. It is written to calm the wrath of God before it breaks out in fury, to turn the heart of the father to the son, and to restore the tribes of Jacob. In verse 1, where it reads, "Then Elijah arose, a prophet like fire, and his word burned like a torch." Elijah's prophetic ministry is described as one of immense power and zeal, symbolized by fire. The metaphor of fire represents not only his fiery zeal, but also his role as a purifier and agent of God's judgment. Remember, fire very often plays that role of purification. We find that in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Verse 3, "By the word of the Lord, he shut up the heavens, and also 3 times brought down fire." This references Elijah's power to intercede with God, specifically through prayer. Elijah's prayer led to the heavens being shut, causing a drought, referring to 1 Kings 17:1. And later, his prayer brought fire from heaven, 1 Kings 18:36-38. These acts are directly tied to his intercession on behalf of God's people, showing that his prayers were instrumental in enacting God's will. You might be thinking on the earth when he was earthly, yes, but we'll show you his heavenly intercession as well in just a moment. But isn't it incredible how the book of Sirach very often is hearkening and pointing the audience to magnificently important events that occurred in the Old Testament. So the book of Sirach is filled with this incredible imagery, hearkening to events that any Jewish audience would have been aware of. Indeed, any lover of the Bible at the time that would have been reading the book of Sirach would have known exactly what the author was referring to. And indeed, that is why these particular passages are laid forth to hammer home and emphasize the amazing role that Elijah the prophet played in salvation history. Verse 5, you who raised a corpse from death and from Hades by the word of the Most High. People wondering where this is referring to. This refers to the resurrection of the widow's son in 1 Kings 17 to 24. Elijah's ability to intercede with God to bring the dead back to life shows his unique role as a mediator between God and humanity. Verses 9 to 10, which are so magnificently filled with incredible theology. You were taken up by a whirlwind of fire in a chariot with horses of fire. You who are ready at the appointed time. It is written to calm the wrath of God before it breaks out in fury, to turn the heart of the father to the son, and to restore the tribes of Jacob. Elijah's assumption into heaven without experiencing death in 2 Kings 2:11 is crucial. Sirach highlights Elijah's ongoing role after his earthly life. Notice that Sirach is highlighting this, specifically his future role in calming God's wrath and the restoring of Israel. This suggests a continued intercessory role where Elijah is seen as a mediator who will come again to intercede on behalf of Israel, and even showing him as a heavenly intercessor. All of this is important. Remember, in these verses, Elijah is depicted as a powerful intercessor who can turn away God's wrath and restore the people. This portrayal suggests that Elijah's role goes beyond his earthly life and directly shows a continuing influence, which is a key aspect of the intercession of the saints. Now, when providing commentary on Sirach in particular, by the way, these texts are tough to stumble upon. You've got the great Saint Jacob of Sirach providing commentary and providing incredible insight into the figure of Elijah as he gives us great commentary on the book of Sirach. Now, Jacob of Sirach is today one of the greatest early church fathers ever. Indeed, he is a magnificent Syriac father. He, of course, perhaps is one of the top fathers in the Syriac-speaking world. It's very tough to say that he is the greatest because you've got the magnificent Ephraim the Syrian, Saint Ephraim the Syrian, deacon and doctor of the church. Well, Jacob of Sirach, who was writing in the late 400s into the 500s, is right there with him in terms of just being amazing and incredible. He is venerated. He is venerated in all of the apostolic churches. He is venerated within Catholicism. He is venerated within Oriental Orthodoxy. He is also an Eastern Orthodox saint. And he's written such a magnificent amount of works, in particular about Holy Mary, our Immaculate Mother Mary. But here we look at his commentary on these verses. Let us speak about the lifting up of that beautiful one and about the brilliant chariot that descended on earth for him. Let us speak about this human body that deserved to dwell with the heavenly ones and of the earthly one who did not return to earth to become dust. Look at that. So he confirms that Elijah ascended and didn't die, and to the humility that crowned him on his way to those on high, and about the son of our race who departed and mixed with the angels. Let us speak about the amazement of those on earth. For those on high had seized one from the earth's embrace to be with them in their heavens. Here is the important thing, is that he talks about saints in heaven with the Lord. He is one of them. He is one of them. This is on his homily 115 on Elijah the prophet and on his ascension to heaven. But St. Jacob will go on. Oh, chosen ones, listen to me speak about the disciple whose beautiful ways have puzzled me. I've become overcome by his teacher, Elijah. So I kept my silence and did not describe him. And that one too. I have moved by his wonders and actions. So in his interpretation here, by the way, he's talking about Elisha, but also about Elijah, because look, he says, I have been overcome by his teacher, Elijah. And that one too, I am moved by his wonders and actions in reference to Elijah. He's moved by his wonders and action. Indeed, he is the disciple of that other beautiful one. The source of his beauty arises from his actions wherever he goes. He prevailed over the bitter one, which he remedied and gave health to the sick, poor earth. Through prophecy, he ended and prevented death, then departed after he had seen its tyranny. So Saint Jacob of Sirach, you can be certain, is another incredible figure. And the incredible Saint Jacob of Sirach doesn't exegete passage after passage of Sirach here, but he does provide us, when he's going over the text of Sirach in his commentary, as the magnificent scholar has pointed out, Father Tadizrus, he has pointed out that the incredible Saint Jacob of Sirach, in exegeting these texts, whereas he doesn't break down text by text, line by line, he still masterfully speaks in a magnificently beautiful way of the great Elijah. Now arrive at the great Cornelius Lapide. And you knew we were going to get here because we've been here before when it comes to his magnificent commentary in Sirach. And indeed, I am blown away at his great commentary. You know, I wish that this whole commentary was available in English. And if you do know where his complete sets are available in English, which I don't think anywhere, I've looked everywhere, then man, I would love to purchase them. It might be one of the very best biblical commentaries that I've ever laid my eyes on. But here you have a fresh translation done for us by a magnificent Latin scholar, near and dear friend of mine. So a translation that otherwise you would not have been able to find in English now is right here for you. So by the way, if you are tuning in early to this, meaning if you are a patron, meaning you have early access, please let us know what you think of the show down below. If you are a member, we greatly appreciate it. Let us know what you think of the show. If you are tuning into this when this premieres, flood the comments section for the algorithm. It will go a long way in helping these videos get viewed. We hope you greatly appreciate this. By the way, again, if you are a patron, if you are a member of mine, you can steal Albert's notes, all of these slides, including new and fresh translations that are very difficult to find. I'd say impossible to find anywhere else in English. They're yours. You can click that link and download them. But let us dive in. The great Cornelius Lapide says, you anoint kings to repentance and make prophets successors after you. He's talking to Elijah. And this is commentary in Sirach 48. You who were caught in a whirlwind of fire, in a chariot of fiery horses, you who are ridden in the judgments of the times, to appease the wrath of the Lord, to reconcile the heart of the Father to the Son, and to restore the tribe of Jacob. Blessed are they who have seen you and are adorned in thy friendship, for we live only this life, but after death our name shall not be such. But look at this. Are you ready to get blown away? Cornelius Lapide is talking, communicating with Elijah, saying, you're ridden in the judgments of the times to appease the wrath of the Lord, just as Sirach 48 says. Blessed are they who have seen you, he tells him, and are adorned in thy friendship. He knows that Elijah, being a saint, being in glory in heaven, he can communicate with him. He knows that. And he goes further to know. Elias was indeed sheltered in the whirlwind, and his spirit was complete in Elisha. Elijah was sheltered in the whirlwind, and his spirit was complete in Elisha. In his words, he did not frighten the prince, and no one could overcome him, nor did any word surpass him. And he prophesied in the afterlife. In his life, he wrought miracles, and in the afterlife, he wrought wonders. And you see, ladies and gentlemen, you see, brothers and sisters, there is a reason why, when discussing the doctrine the teaching, the intercession of the saints, you've got to go to the Old Testament. You've got to go to the deuterocanonical texts. They are part of the Old Testament. They are not of a lower status. And the early church fathers knew that. That is why every single council to discuss the contents of sacred scripture included the book of Sirach. Indeed, the book of Sirach is called prophetic by so many, utilized by so many. Now, you very often think about Second Maccabees, or maybe even other places when you're thinking about discussing and dialoguing about intercession of the saints. Now you've got another one to be able to bring up when you're sitting at the campfire with friends and family that want to know about the Catholic faith, maybe Jewish friends, and you want to share this with them. Say, look, we share this in common. Maybe your evangelical friends that you want to teach them a little bit more about the faith. Or maybe your Catholic friends, your Catholic brothers and sisters that you want to tell them, look, did you ever notice this? Interesting, you tell them. Even the great saints notice this. Let me now break down this text for you. You're able to do that now. We hope you've been edified. We hope you've been liking the shows that we've been coming out with. We promise we have a lot more material to come. We have so much more material to come for you. We've got a ton. And indeed, we're just getting started with Spanish material, with English material. We are having a blast, and we're so happy to be able to be right here with you, to share these videos with you, to share our love of the faith with you. Please consider becoming a patron if you haven't yet. The links are down below, and we want to tell you, God bless you, God keep you. And from the Apocrypha Apocalypse team, from the Master, incredible, the Titan, Gary Machuda, and from the great Dr. Zavaris, and from myself, Humble William, we tell you, we love you with all our hearts. God bless you, God keep you. We'll be back very soon.